Hey, you clicked on my video. Appreciate it. Now be sure to like the video and subscribe to the page.
All right, long enough to cover the subject, short enough to keep it interesting. Welcome to Out of My League interview with On3 Sports Billy Embody, who is just back from his honeymoon, what he tells me, back to reality with the rest of us. So how was your honeymoon?
It was great. Highly recommend going to Spain. We hit Barcelona, Ibiza, Mallorca, and also stopped in Bordeaux to see some of my new family. So we had an absolute blast. And yeah, if you ever get the chance, go over there and enjoy the great people, food, views, everything. It was incredible.
Awesome. Yeah, my ancestors on my dad's side are from Spain, so definitely want to visit there sometime. All right, so Kaleb Jackson, running back out of Liberty, number one running back in the state. I don't think anyone's really surprised that he picked LSU. This was kind of expected, but just break down his recruitment, Frank Wilson doing what he does, and his comp as a player, if you could.
Yeah, the thing about Kaleb Jackson, though, is this was not a layup for LSU. Alabama brought him in on an official visit. Texas A&M brought him in on an official visit. And especially Alabama gave him a lot to think about. I can tell you that he was really high on Alabama and what that program brings. And certainly they did a really good job recruiting him as well. But, this one was kind of back and forth with some intel laid on both sides. But, LSU comes out with his commitment, and you could tell how excited he was on his commitment video with his mom on her birthday, doing that to kind of honor her. And so they land Kaleb Jackson, about 5'10", 200 pounds, been one of the most productive backs in Louisiana. This is somebody that's going to be, I think, has a chance to be a really solid SEC player for LSU and end up, maybe carving out an NFL career. He's got an elite 100-meter time, and he's been on the radar even before Liberty ended up playing a varsity schedule. Broke out on the JV ranks, and then they were able to go ahead and move up to varsity, and he ran for 1,500 yards and 23 TDs in 2021. And I just think he's built, kind of as a one-cut, really powerful back. We'll see how he does as far as his lateral agility. That's something that I think he still wants to work on and develop in his game. But as far as hitting the hole and doing it with conviction, he's got that in his repertoire. So a really nice land for Frank Wilson. Joe Sloan also helped in a big way on this recruitment. So you got to give the LSU staff credit for reeling in, the top two backs in the state.
And keeping it with Frank Wilson, so he's got his two running backs now. He's, unless anything changes until signing day, they're set at that position. So now Frank Wilson, he's got, more time on his hands to help out with other players in state at different positions. I do know that he is the primary recruiter, from my understanding. Correct me if I'm wrong. He's the primary recruiter for Derek Williams, the safety out of New Iberia, who's committed to Texas. Heard that recruitment's not over, but how do you think Frank Wilson, specifically with Derek Williams, but in general, Frank Wilson now with more time on his hands to help out this staff in state, how does this affect LSU in recruiting?
Yeah, I think one thing that this staff has done a good job of is really making clear what areas are what, and Frank Wilson's going to factor in a way, with most Louisiana prospects, and Derek Williams is no exception. I think that's a recruitment that's still not done, like you said. Alabama was kind of considered the long-standing favorite in that one, if you were looking at it from a long-term perspective. But he ends up taking an official visit to Texas the last weekend of June, and he ends up popping for the Longhorns. And, I think this is one that, if you're LSU, there are a bunch of coaches that have, made their way to Westgate over the spring. Jamar Kane to check on Demarion Johnson, Kerry Cooks, Joe Sloan, Frank Wilson. It's been kind of an entire group effort keeping him at the top of their board when they were able to visit schools and things like that. But, now it's kind of a race to signing day for whoever can get Derek Williams on board. Michigan was in there, but I think, Alabama is certainly going to be a factor. Florida could factor in with Corey Raymond's ties to the program, and Clemson as well. So like you said, this one isn't over. I think it's going to take a group effort for LSU to land him. Even when the old staff was here, there wasn't a ton of momentum that LSU was going to get him. And it was kind of an Alabama LSU kind of battle early on. So it developed over the course of the spring and summer into more of a national recruitment. So it can go a bunch of different ways, but LSU is not going to give up on him. And certainly, even though they have a good safety haul committed already, and certainly want Kaleb Jackson as well, they can't let up on Derek Williams, and they're not.
Yeah, certainly be interesting to watch because we've got a long time until the first signing period. So I don't know if you were still unplugged on your honeymoon, but on Sunday there was quite a blow up on Twitter of Shelton Sampson, the wide receiver out of Catholic. A lot of current LSU players were retweeting, Shelton stays, and a lot of subtweeting by some LSU staffers. We'll get to him in a minute. I'll tease that for the next question, but there's been a lot of worry about in-state recruits, still are, by LSU fans. And because LSU seems to be obviously using their national relationships with the Brian Kelly staff, but they also have seemed to be taking some flyers on some three-star guys. Whit Weeks, linebacker, just this past weekend. Kyle Parker out of Texas, the wide receiver. Ashton Stamps and Jeremiah Hughes, two defensive backs. Sort of a bigger picture question. What's the difference that you've seen in the evaluation process of recruits from Ed Ogeron to Brian Kelly, the evaluation process?
I think the biggest difference is, and it kind of goes almost by position, at least in this class so far. You have a guy like Kyle Parker has put down honestly everything that a staff should need to see from him to get an offer. And he did that. He has the 100-meter time. He has the production. He came out and worked out privately for Cortez Hankton. He just checks a lot of boxes. And so they offered him, and they worked him out and did all those things. And that's why he's in the class. And then you bring him in for an official visit, and that helped close the deal. But, somebody like Jeremiah Hughes, they're relying a lot on their intel. Nico Fertitta, who's a GA for LSU, was at Bishop Gorman as a coach, played there as well. So he knows a lot about Jeremiah Hughes, and that, helped get LSU on the radar with him in a big way, with Steeples, helping it there as well. And they liked what they saw. He's coming off an injury. They're betting on him to return to form, and, we'll see. So you kind of factor that in, and then you factor in, a guy like Whit Weeks. They know a lot about. They know who they're getting as a person for the most part, just because of having West on campus, already playing for LSU. If you look at his recruitment, Clemson, Georgia, and Oklahoma really wanted him badly, especially Georgia and Oklahoma. So those are two teams that I probably trust as much as anyone to evaluate linebackers and defensive linemen, just with the staffs that they have. So if they wanted Whit Weeks that badly, that stands out to me. I do think you want to, verify his, times and things like that. But I mean, he is pretty fearless and is productive and all those things. And we'll see how he adjusts to the SEC. I think West coming in after playing some at Virginia, it looks like he might be more of a depth guy from what I've heard, at least now, but he's still young. He could still develop. So we'll kind of see how Whit Weeks does, but there's a lot to like about him, at least on paper. And same with Ashton Stamps. And honestly, I thought Ashton Stamps was one of the best overall prospects to come through camp this summer. And he did it 3 times and earned the offer and did it the right way. So, yeah, I mean, those guys specifically have their own stories. And I think that's what kind of stands out. They have those different stories on some of these guys that they're recruiting, and they don't necessarily waver from worrying about that. And they have strong convictions in recruiting maybe some of these underrated guys. Whereas you might have seen LSU in the past just kind of hang around on some of these bigger prospects when the national buzz is that there's no way he ends up at LSU, and then kind of bites him in the tail. For the most part, the staff has gone out and aggressively pursued all the prospects that they need to in Louisiana. And, this class overall in Louisiana, whether it was Ed Ogeron recruiting them or Brian Kelly, it was going to be a struggle, and it was going to be a struggle to be as, successful as, one would normally hope in a cycle, just because of the state of these prospects, whether it be Arch Manning going to Texas, it never seemed like he was going to LSU. Eli Holstein, everybody knows that saga. Even Ricky Collins is one that's, seems like it might be a tough pull. Derek Williams, Jaden Osbury, Tackett Curtis, you just had all these prospects that had these storylines that they were already, kind of counting LSU out. So for the most part, it's a tough class to kind of decipher all of that with, because it is the first cycle. But I think the big thing is that they're pretty strong in their convictions on their evaluations. And we'll kind of see how they do getting the high level guys that they need to really compete for national championships. I think they did that on the defensive line. They have the opportunity to do it on the offensive line. Wide receiver is looking, really strong. I mean, if you take a class of Jaylen Brown, Shelton Sampson, and Kyle Parker, just off those three alone, you're sitting pretty at wide receiver. And I think they would like to add a fourth. So this is a class that's going to be really interesting, and some of them are long-term bets that they're going to pan out, maybe over some of the offers that they had, or committable offers and things like that. But for the most part, they have a balance of what they want and desire and value from what I've seen so far. And that's what makes some of these maybe underrated takes or underranked, or however you want to put it, a little bit more interesting.
And when now LSU has gotten their fair share of, big time gets, obviously, Jackson, Howard, he's a top 100 player, but the big one was, of course, Jaylen Brown out of Miami. They got, right under from the Hurricanes, who are spending a lot of NIL money, and they're boasting about it. Obviously, I'm not expecting any of us to know exactly what the numbers are about NIL, but just from your opinion, a year into this or 2 years into this, before, recruiting was always about, really mostly, even though some players were getting paid, relationships and geography. That's what I was always told. It comes down to one of those two things, or both of those things: relationships and geography for a player. In your opinion, has NIL simply diminished those things, or is NIL just a third factor in the process of relationships and geography? In other words, do relationships and geography, are they still a primary concern for every player?
I think the guys that you alluded to getting paid before NIL are similar to the ones that are valuing it now, and it's just kind of an openly talked about thing now, quite honestly. So I don't know if it's truly changed too much. You've seen some programs, because it's allowed, be able to tap into the resources to land some prospects that maybe they might not have normally landed. Like if you look at Tennessee landing Nico Iamaleava, I mean, that's one that stands out right there. Miami landed a 5-star offensive tackle recently as well. So there are some programs that do have a little bit more power, because it's open instead of maybe under the table, so to speak. But I don't really think it changes much, in that sense. I think prospects have an eye on it, but you have to have relationships to talk about it. You have to recruit a prospect the right way. Just an example, there's some prospects that they will have their eye on NIL when they get to the next level, but it's not necessarily a factor in their decision to go to a college. And you have to take the right approach as a coach, knowing that, or not knowing it in some cases, to make sure you don't say the wrong thing, assuming one thing, and then all of a sudden your prospect and their family thinks you're just going to try to buy everybody or whatever. And you have to know how to navigate those situations accordingly, because some are about NIL and how they can rep their brand and obviously end up in the NFL and all the things, but you have to know how to play it. So I always like to say it's mostly about relationships, because if you don't have the relationships or the understanding of that relationship, you can't even get to the next step of overcoming a geographical issue or problem that the school might have with a certain prospect, or you can't get to the discussion about NIL, or you can't even say, hey, I've developed, X number of first round picks in my career. You can't get to that next step without a relationship. So I think it comes down to relationships, and that's still the biggest factor in my opinion. For the most part, there's a few guys that dream of playing at X school, no matter what coach coaches there for the most part, but you've got to be able to have the relationships there to really get yourself in the door and land some of these prospects.
All right, so we've teased him long enough. Shelton Sampson, 5-star wide receiver out of Catholic High. As far as I know, you've just gotten back to the States, but what the hell was up with all these LSU players tweeting hashtag Shelton stays? It was, it seemed, interesting, but also maybe a little desperate. Where does LSU stand with Shelton Sampson?
I think LSU sits in a really good spot for Shelton Sampson. I don't know just yet if we're going to see him move his decision all the way up to, this month, and he makes the call before the summer. But he has told us at least that he's moving up his decision just from an overall timeline. And that could mean earlier in his senior year, that could mean July, that could mean a lot of things. But we don't know exactly just yet. I do think that this staff does have a tendency to fire up Twitter a little bit more when things happen in recruiting or when they are trying to make an extra point in recruiting. And some of the tweets mean things, some of them don't mean anything at all. It's kind of funny to look at it from that lens and say, okay, you can clearly see when a commitment happens and a prospect announces and they're committed and, the staff blows it up on Twitter. That's very easy to decipher, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes they're just trying to just gas up a little emotion and still maybe create some buzz and momentum through that. So, I don't know too much about where the Shelton stays thing truly came from. I do think it's definitely something that's obviously organized, but they can't really do too much at the same time as far as that type of stuff. So they had to be a little particular with it, I think. And, it created a buzz and it created, a lot of LSU people and guys nationally talking about the Shelton Sampson recruitment. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But yeah, overall, I think LSU sits in a good spot with Shelton Sampson.
Awesome. All right, we got about 2 minutes left because I know you got to get out of here. So we'll do kind of a rapid fire. Where does LSU stand? Who are they fighting with each prospect? So Chase Besantis, the offensive tackle out of New Jersey. Where does LSU stand? Who's LSU battling, by the way?
Yeah, this one is tough and probably not as rapid fire as we want, but LSU's battling Michigan State, Rutgers, Texas A&M for Chase Besantis, who I think is nearing a decision here in the month of July, from what I've heard. So this one could be happening soon. Depending on who you ask, it could go a bunch of different ways, honestly. He's got the ties to stay right there at Rutgers, and they're actually doing a good job with Greg Schiano there, right now. And then Michigan State with Mel Tucker. I mean, he's one of the best recruiters in the country. If he was at, a top program just running the show, I think they would be a true force in recruiting, having top 5 classes, kind of like a Mario Cristobal kind of buzz about them, as far as recruiting goes. And then Texas A&M, Steve Adazio has a lot of ties up to the Northeast from his time up there and has recruited them really well. But I think, from what I gather, it's LSU, Michigan State, Rutgers is what I hear the most. And that's in no order. We really don't know. I think he's truly torn and he has a tough decision on his hands.
All right, I'll just do 2 more. Jaden Osbury, how's that going with him and Matt House? I know he's really been impressed with him.
Yeah, they really like Matt House. There's no doubt about that. I think Michigan is probably the team to watch, as well as Notre Dame there. With Jaden Osbury. I think he could surprise some people, but I think as of now, he's leaving the state.
Okay. Jordan Matthews, LSU still in it? I know he's a Texas lean.
Yep. Jordan Matthews is one that I think is going to take it to the fall. He took a Texas official visit this summer, he took Tennessee, Michigan, and Stanford official visits this summer, has desire to get back to Texas and certainly looks like a Texas lean. But LSU's not going to give up, and I expect them to be in it right till the end with him.
All right, last one. Ricky Collins. Can Joe Sloan flip him?
I would say right now, no. I think they're going to try to see if they can get Brock Glenn on campus, but that one has a long way to go. So I just think as of right now, I don't think he has a desire to flip.
Okay. Billy Embody on 3 Sports. Check him out at Billy Embody on Twitter, or read his stuff at Bengal Tiger on 3 on Twitter. Thank you so much for your time, Billy.
Thanks a lot, Nick. I appreciate it. Have a good one.
You too.
Thanks for listening to Out of My League. If you like what you heard, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Or follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok in the description link below.